Friday, November 17. There are many hungry, needy and mistreated people in our world today. You can do your part, however small it might seem to be. We are not going to solve all the world's problems before Jesus returns. We haven't been called to do that. But until then, our work can be as basic as helping someone you know who does not have enough food, or it can be helping a member in the church who is facing injustice, even bigotry, which remains a real problem in our world, even today. And then there's this quote from Testimonies for the Church, Volume 2, page 25. Pure religion and undefiled before the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction, and to keep himself unspotted from the world. Good deeds are the fruit that Christ requires us to bear. Kind words, deeds of benevolence, of tender regard for the poor, the needy, the afflicted. When hearts sympathize with hearts burdened with discouragement and grief, when the hand dispenses to the needy, when the naked are clothed, the stranger made welcome to a seat in your parlour and a place in your heart, angels are coming very near, and an answering strain is responded to in heaven. Every act of justice, mercy, and benevolence makes melody in heaven. The Father from his throne beholds those who do these acts of mercy and numbers them with his most precious treasures. And they shall be mine, saith the Lord of hosts, in that day when I make up my jewels. Every merciful act to the needy, the suffering, is regarded as though done to Jesus. When you succour the poor, sympathize with the afflicted and oppressed, and befriend the orphan, you bring yourselves into a closer relationship to Jesus. End of quote. And that brings us to our 3 discussion questions for this week. 1. How can we make sure we understand that the command to love God and others is not salvation by works? When we consider who Jesus is and what he did for us on the cross, why is the idea that anything we can do to earn or merit salvation so great an error? And we're referred here to Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 to 8, about what Jesus actually did. Verse 5, Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant, and coming in the likeness of men. And, being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself, and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. How can we learn to distinguish between working for salvation, which is a fatal mistake, and revealing in our lives the salvation that we already have in Jesus? And question 2, how can we learn to recognize some of the inherent prejudices we might have toward those who are different from us? And 3, other than those passages studied in this week's lesson, what other scriptural support do you find for the need to show kindness to others, no matter who they are?
Mission Path to Spain, Part 1, by Andrew McChesney. Louis fell ill shortly after he was baptized and enrolled as a theology student at Venezuela Adventist University. At first he thought it was the flu, but the symptoms worsened and he struggled to breathe. Physicians suggested that he might be allergic to the pollen from the orange trees that blossomed around the university. He received many injections, but his lungs still wouldn't allow him to breathe. Physicians advised him to quit his studies and return home, but he didn't want to leave. He continued to get tested. Then a medical test showed that he was infected with HIV. It was a time when people were afraid of HIV in Venezuela. Many thought that they might catch the virus through touch. Louis was asked to leave the seminary. Louis had no choice but to go home. At home, he underwent additional medical checks. The results were always the same, HIV. Louis couldn't understand why. Hadn't he given his heart to God? Hadn't he been studying to become a pastor? He was very sad. A church elder noticed his downcast countenance. "You should be joyful," the elder said. If you aren't joyful, it's because you haven't met Jesus. The observation struck deep in Louis's heart. He went to his bedroom and knelt down. He prayed to God for forgiveness. He acknowledged that he had not glorified God with his body in his former life and was at fault for contracting HIV. I don't want you to heal me, he prayed. I just want to preach for the rest of the days that you grant me. At that moment, something unusual happened. Louis felt as if his heart starting to burn and the heat spread over his whole body. He blacked out. When Louis got tested once again, the results came back negative. Surprised, he asked to be tested again and again. Always he was HIV-free. Why are you asking for more tests if the results are negative? The physician asked. You don't need to be tested anymore. Making good on his promise to God, Louis dedicated his life to preaching and bringing people to Jesus. He got married and completed his theology studies at the university in 2006. I haven't stopped preaching the gospel ever since, he said. Today, Louis and his family are missionaries in Spain. Thank you for your Sabbath School mission offering that helps support missionaries around the world. Read next week about how a hostage crisis caused Louis to leave Venezuela.
You have been listening to a reading of the Adult Sabbath School lessons by Dr. Percy Harrold and the inside story by his niece Sibylla. Apart from being provided free to those who are visually impaired, these audio lessons are available on the official General Conference Sabbath School and Personal Ministry app, on SoundCloud, Apple iTunes, and also on YouTube. Search for Percy Harrold Sabbath to find all of these. And remembering all the time that God is always faithful.